Welcome to another DDi CADcast. My name is Maurice Cherian, and today we will cover what's new in SolidWorks 2014 on routing. That includes piping, tubing, and electrical routing. We'll go ahead and get started with the slides now. So I'm going to first talk about electrical routing in the enhancements in 2014 on the electrical side of routing. The first thing I'm going to show is display color connector pins, so you can show the different colors of the pin leads on both ends of a wire route on both connectors. Secondly, we're going to show the ability to show a connector that's not just a part connector anymore. You can actually have it be an assembly, and SolidWorks will let you create the assembly connector in the routing library, and also it'll work in a from to list too. Next, I'll go over the support for crimps and terminals in the connector library. And then lastly, go over electrical flattening enhancements. That'll be on a separate slide. So we'll go ahead and start with the connector pin colors. Here is a route. There's two wire routes in here. This one route, just so you know, you can always assign wires and pins. If you look at the electrical attributes here, you can see I've already assigned to the three wires here. They have three different wires, they have different pin connectors here, and if you ever wanted to see how to change that, you go into edit wire. You can see the separate pin connectors, connections between the different connectors here. So once that's set up, now I'll go ahead and exit out of the route here, and when I go to flatten this, you can see I have different options. I have one option here is just display in 3D connector, or I can say use drawing connector blocks. So to show the colors, you're going to have to use the connector blocks. And now I'll pick a size format. It's already been selected. I'll go ahead and say OK, and now it's going to create the drawing here, and the drawing is going to ask me to select the length. I'll go ahead and say yes to adding the length here. And now you can see the different corresponding colors here, the red, yellow, and blue. You can see it corresponds with the connector here on this side, and then the corresponding pins on the other end on the other connector over here. So this is new for 2014. You are going to need to use the connector block. The 3D connector will not show these colors. Now I'll go back to the slides. The second thing I wanted to show was that there's the ability to now create an assembly connector. Previous releases you can only make a part connector. Now you can have separate leads and a back shell and other pieces added, so it can be now an assembly connector, and that is supported in the routing library and in from to list. So I will show this now in SolidWorks. This is an assembly. It has separate leads. It has a separate case here, so it's two components with a pattern. So it is an assembly. Now I do have a connection point already created here at the green part has a routing point. So I'll go to routing tools, and I will create an assembly connector. I'm going to go in the routing library manager, and here's routing component wizard. And when I click next, you can see now the new functionality here. It is an assembly connector. Before, you could only make it with the part connector. So I'll click next, and this is going to be very similar to what you do when you create a part connector. It does want us to add a routing point, so I'll go ahead and add a connector routing point. So when I click add, it's going to minimize the routing manager. And you can see now it's asking me to add a connection point, and so usually you pick a face and a sketch at the part level. In this case, it wants to pick an existing one. So there is a route point here. I could pick it from the tree too. But you can see here it says existing connection point of a component level route here. In this case, a connection point. So I'll click OK. And now it's going to bring back up the routing manager. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to add a mate reference. Now I can add multiple connection points, but I will leave it at one for now. Again, this is very similar to creating a part level connector. It does want me to add a mate reference, so I'll quickly do that. In the mate reference, you can use circular edges, In this case, I'll pick a circular edge and I'll pick this face. And I usually do it anti-aligned. So again, this is like a part connector. And now the last step here is I can add more mate references. But in this case, I'll leave it at 2. And now it's going to validate the component or the assembly, make sure that there's nothing else missing. And now the last step is going to be adding some file properties, like I can add the manufacturer and some other file properties. And now this is the important step, is make sure you know which directory it's going to. In this case, it's the design library. In this case, for 2014, I have seen that sometimes it's back one release. And so make sure your directory structure is correct on that. You can check the options for your design library to make sure that's pointing to the right location. And I'm going to click finish here. And now it's telling me that it's not going to save all the assembly references in this design library, so you can change that and move those files over if you want to, but it's only going to save the top level assembly there in the design library. I'll close the routing library manager, and now you can see the assembly connector is now available in the design library list here. Now I'll go back to the slides. The next thing I'm going to show is support for crimps and terminals and seals in the connector library, and that also will show up while you're working in the assembly or in your route. So I'll go back to SolidWorks again. So here's the assembly I was working on earlier, and now this assembly, when I edit the assembly, one of the new things you'll see in here when I go to edit the route, you'll notice if I select one of the routes here and I go over to edit wires, down on the bottom of the list here, now I can use library data, and so now there's the things available like terminals, seals, plugs, and then there's some other miscellaneous ones. Now this information here is coming from the library, and so you can see here's some seals and here's terminals in here. So this information you can assign here to the different parts of the routes and the different segments here. That'll show up as part of the electrical attributes. So let me go ahead and show you here where that's at in the library too. The library does have some sample files in here, some sample information. So I'll go back to the routing library manager. And now I'm in the component library wizard here. And what's new for 2014 is that you do see here terminals are now available in here, seals and plugs, and there's some other miscellaneous ones. So there are some sample files here that do have that information here, so that can be used in the electrical route. While you're editing the route, you can add more information to the routes, and that will show up on the drawings when you create the different bill of materials in the automated drawing when you flatten the routes. I'll go back to the slides now. The next thing I'm going to show is some of the electrical flattening enhancements. Some of those include the support of coverings and being able to show the clips in a flattened route. You can also adjust the form board size now on a manufacturer route. And then also you can pick some of the different items to display. And then also you can now route with the service loop, and that service loop will show in a dotted line display. I'll go back over to SolidWorks now. I have two routes here. And so I'll pick one of the routes here to show you some of this functionality. Now the first thing I will show is an annotation route, and you'll see here, here's the new functionality. Here's flatten clips. And now if I flatten it, you will notice that now the clips show up in here on this, in this case, the annotation route. I'll go back to the first route here again. Now if I go to flatten, I'm going to go ahead and show you with manufacturer route. I'll pick a segment to flatten. And now you can see here's flatten clips here. And now you will see the clips show up. And now you see the form board, and now it used to not be able to be changed on the size of it, but now here if I go to edit the flatten route, you can see now I can change the size so that it fits better in here. I can move I'll change the offset. That offset was already available, but now I can go ahead and change this, and I'll go ahead and add a curve here so it fits better. And I can pick another segment. So now my form board, if I wanted to, I can change the size of it so that it fits better with the route. And now I'll go ahead and flatten it for the drawing here. So now it should fit a little bit better onto a sheet here. So now you can see the clips show, and the form board side was adjusted as I was making the edits to the route itself. So let's go back over to the slides again. Next, I'm going to go over what's new on the piping and tubing side of routing. First, I'm going to go over the OLETs, that's weld OLET and thread OLET, improvements on being able to add linear and angular dimensions. I'm going to go over how you can now modify a slope and add fittings and add route segments. And then spool enhancements, you can actually now add components that aren't all continuous segments. They can be broken up in multiple non-continuous pieces now, and you can also include components and hangers and other things that you couldn't add before. And then finally, very similarly to adding assembly connectors on the electrical side of routing, for piping and tubing you can now add assembly fittings, and that includes valves, end flanges, and equipment and other fittings. So I'll show you some of that functionality. Let's go back over to SolidWorks. So here is a route. It has a couple of different routes in here. So I'll go ahead and add a few weld OLETs and thread OLETs here. So here's the thread OLET. And when I first start this, I got to edit the route. So I'll edit the route. And now add a thread OLET here. And I can tab it to rotate it. And now when I first place it, before it wasn't very user-friendly. It was a little bit detached if you moved it around too much, and it wouldn't really work real well. But you can see here, it does have, if I turn on the sketch relations, it does have a long Z. It has a perpendicular relationship here. The nice thing now is I can add dimensions. In this case, I'll add a linear dimension to this one. So it's a lot more manageable than it was before, which is very nice. I'll add another one over here so we can see it. So here I'll add a weld OLET. And when I add it, I need to add it, I'll pick a direction by clicking on tab. And now one of the nice things here is I can use an angular dimension. I'll remove the along Z relationship. And I recommend, maybe putting in a center line here if you wanted to show an angular dimension. So here I'm going to go ahead and use this center line to help me put this at a different angle. So you can dimension linearly and angularly here with the dimensioning scheme, and it is just a lot more user friendly than it was before. So weld OLET and thread OLET, you'll like some of the dimensioning functionality that's been added. It's a little bit easier to manage. Now I'm going to go ahead and show the improvements to the slope functionality. You can add fittings and route segments to an existing slope. So I'll go back to SolidWorks. So right here there's a slope added to this segment here, and I'm going to add another piece, this second segment, to an existing slope. So I need to edit the route, and now you can see the slope here a little bit. It has a 1.91 degree here. Now what I can do is I can right click and say edit slope, and before you really couldn't do much editing. Now I can go ahead and add a second component to it, and you can see the yellow, and when I go ahead and say OK to it, you'll see now you can see the slope. It added that piece to the existing slope here. So again, when you go to edit slope, you can see you can add segments. You can also add fittings to it. So it will actually let you modify and add additional pieces to it. And once I close out of the sketch, you can see the functionality. So you can see where the the dotted line shows where the slope was before, or where the segment was before the slope. So now I'll go back over to the slides. Next thing I'm going to show you is spool enhancements. There are ways to now add non-continuous segments to a spool. You can add hangers and other components. I'm going to show that functionality. So this route here, when I go in here and edit this route has the pieces on the top here. It's got this route segment here, then all the pieces on the bottom. So when I go to routing and go to piping, I can define a spool, and I'll pick this top segment. And then when I used to pick a spool before, I had to make sure that all the pieces were connected, and now you can see that these pieces aren't. I'll pick a few more pieces here. So usually a spool is usually used to help transport bigger components and break them down into smaller pieces. Now here's what's nice is you can add hangers now. So I can add hangers and other pieces, and when I'm done, this spool is going to be two non-continuous pieces here, and I can add more to it, but that should be good enough to show you this. So it's going to add the spool, and all these pieces are not all connected. Before they had to be connected, and the spool will show up here on the bottom here, and you can see it highlighted. You can see that I didn't add all these other pieces to it, and these two segments are not connected. So that's some more of the new functionality for 2014. Now I'll go back over to the slides. So the last thing I'll show is where you can add assembly fittings for piping and for tubing. Very similar to creating an assembly connector on the electrical route side. In this case, it's going to be an assembly fitting, and so you can add flanges, equipment, valves, and they don't always have to be a part. They can be an assembly. So let me go over and show you that in the Routing Library Manager. So I'll go to the Routing Library Manager. What you'll notice is if I go to the Routing Component Wizard, now under Piping and Tubing, you'll see now here is Assembly Fittings, and you can see here's all the other things available. You can see now I got valves, end flange, equipment, other fittings. Those can all be now assemblies, and that works the same for piping and for tubing. So again, you have other types of assemblies that you can use, and once you set the routing points, then you can use it in the design library and drag it in just like if it was a part. This would be set up very similarly to how I created the assembly connector in the electrical routing wizard earlier in this webcast, so I won't go over the same steps again. But once you set the route points, then it'll be able to be used. Use this just like you would use a part fitting in an assembly route. Thanks for watching this CADcast. For more CADcast topics, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DDi CAD or our tech blog at DDiCAD.com/tech center. Thanks again for watching.